The purpose of today is to really take people through what's involved with writing a paper, essentially, and some of the things that are very helpful to know if you're intending to get it through the review process and to be accepted for the main conference. So that's what we're going to be looking at today. So the ASEC each year, we normally have round about 40 papers submitted to it. So last year, I think we had 38, the year before about 37. So it's round about the 40 mark, sort of plus or minus a couple. And you have to bear in mind that only 11 of those papers are going to get through to the main conference. And then we also have 2 reserve papers. And the reserve papers, basically, they get into the proceedings. So we have the downloadable proceedings, but also you can buy hard copies, paper copies of the proceedings as well. And so even if your paper doesn't get in, if you're one of the 2 reserve papers, you will be in the proceedings. And what will happen then if somebody can't make it, or if we have technical difficulties, then we can slot you in as one of the reserve papers. We've also, what we started this year, but actually based on last year's ASEC, obviously, is that each of the 2 reserve papers is actually getting their own online presentation that's been recorded. So we've just last week and the week before, we recorded both of the reserve papers. So out of about 40 papers, you're looking at 11 that are going to get through to the main conference, plus 2 reserves. So it's really only 1 in 3 papers are actually going to get through. So and bear in mind that the quality of the papers these days is actually very, very high. So when I took over as technical director, there wasn't a particularly good review process in place, and to be honest, there was all sorts of stuff getting through that I don't think should have got through. So we've got quite a robust paper processing at the moment, which I'll talk you through in a moment. But to begin with, what I want to talk about is what makes a good paper. Now, what I'm going to talk about what makes a good paper. I'm going to talk about how the review process works, and then I'm going to show you the advice that we give to reviewers as well, because if you can understand how your paper is going to get reviewed, then obviously that's going to help you with that's going to help you with writing a good paper, and it's going to increase the chances of it getting through. So the thing I want to focus on to begin with is the general order of things we can see here on this page. So basically, we've had the call that went out a week or so ago, and authors respond by submitting a short abstract. The abstract, generally speaking, as long as you stick to the criteria of between 200 and 300 words, and it is related to systems engineering, you will be invited to submit a full paper. There aren't many abstracts that actually get rejected at that level, so it's really just a filter to make sure that they're appropriate for the conference, to be quite honest. So the vast majority of the abstracts get in. What we also ask on the abstract is that you give us an idea of the general topic area and the level of the paper as well, and we'll come to what that means in a moment. This is important at this level, at this point, because once the abstracts are in, and I know in my role as technical director, I know the sort of topics that we got, then I can start to allocate appropriate reviewers for it. You have to bear in mind that there's 3 reviewers for each paper. When you submit a full paper, you won't know who the reviewers are. They won't know who you are either, and I'll talk about that in a moment, how we anonymize them. But essentially, when you do submit your abstract, if you can provide a good indication of the topic area, then I can make sure that we've got good reviewers based on that, with skills in the right area. On a couple of occasions, people have submitted quite strange topic areas or none at all, in which case you're going to end up with a generic reviewer. So it's actually in your interest to actually identify which area of systems engineering your paper is focused on, because as I said, that's how I allocate the reviewers. That's the only way that I can allocate the reviewers. I have a pool of reviewers as well. This pool expands every year, and it gets we invite more people each year to go onto it, but essentially I've got a pool of reviewers. I know what areas they're qualified to assess papers in, and the allocation is done on that basis. All reviewers have a minimum of CEng or CSEP, and also they identify a number of, usually it's 3 different areas that they feel that they're qualified to review on. So that's the first part. So you submit the abstract. On that, you give us an idea of the topic areas, and then I can start looking for reviewers. You then get, it's about, assuming that you're successful with the abstract, you get about, it's about a month typically to then write the paper. Each paper is limited to 6 pages. Okay, and as I said, I'll then allocate 3 reviewers, each of whom will be experts in the subject matter of the paper. Each review comes back and is scored 0 to 10. 0 being terrible and 10 being very, very good. Okay. I'd like to stress at this point, I don't review, personally, I don't review any of the papers, okay? The only time that I get involved in reviewing is if there's a discrepancy between the reviewers' scores. So, for example, let's imagine 2 of the reviewers score a paper of 8 and 1 reviewer scores a paper of 3. So if there's a discrepancy of more than 3 marks between reviewers, I will then investigate and have a look. And I've got options, and I can either allocate a new reviewer, or I can even, in some cases, discount one of the reviews that's come in. So I am personally not involved in any of the reviews as a reviewer, and that's important because I need to be impartial about it. The final decision is basically, it's based on the scores. So each of the 3 reviewers submits a score between 0 and 10. I then average these, and then it's that average mark. That's how we know which papers get in and which don't. And it's simply done on the highest 11 papers get accepted. The next 2 get accepted as reserve papers. And what we found the last few years is that the difference between, you know, being accepted and not has really only been, you know, half a mark or a mark. So it is important that you do submit your paper in a way that the reviewers, it's going to make it easy for the reviewers to look at, because that can make all the difference to the score. And as I said, that extra point here and there is going to make a big difference. When we do get the reviews in, whether it's accepted or not, you will always receive feedback that I compile from each of the 3 reviewers. So there's a section in the review template that I'll show you in a moment that asks for specific comments to be addressed to the author. As you'll see later, there's also comments that are addressed to me and to INCOSE UK, rather than that won't go back to you as the author. So that's an overview of the high level process that we go through, the whole submission process. We have a theme each year, and it's important. This theme is important because it gives us something to hang the conference around. The papers don't have to fit the theme exactly, but you know, it is recommended that you try to. But we're not going to rule you out because you haven't fit the theme exactly, and that's quite important. When it comes to the paper itself, and this is the generic, what we refer to as the anatomy of a good paper. So this is what we're getting the reviewers to look at. It's essentially, we've got the preamble, so the author details with your affiliation, email and name, the categorization. So basically there, what we've got is the topic area. And although there isn't a definitive list of topics, there is a high level list of topics that you might expect. So things like requirements engineering, configuration management, MBSE, digital twins, all these sorts of things are there as topics. We also ask to score in terms of accessibility. So is it aimed at beginners? Is it best practice? Or is it kind of cutting edge research? And again, that's important because it can make a difference to the reviewer, but also when it comes to, if your paper is accepted, this is how we're going to sort of road sign it in terms of the conference. Okay. And also the application itself. So what is it actually being applied to? The paper abstract, as you can see here, this should be the same as what was submitted. Obviously, you might update it in between submitting the abstract and writing the paper, but essentially it's got to be the abstract for the right paper. And then we've got the paper body, which I'll talk about in a moment, and the set of references. Okay. So let's go through what these things are. So the author details, obviously that's your name and affiliation email. So categorization, so we've got the accessibility, which is the level of knowledge. We've got the application, so things here, what's it being applied to? Is it research? Is it a case study? Is it best practice? And the topic, so there's a list of some of the ones that we're talking about. So MBSE architecture, enterprise systems engineering, and so on. And as I said, that's not an exhaustive list, but this is a start point. The paper, the main body of the paper, we try not to be too prescriptive on this because we do want it to be quite flexible, but essentially you must have an introduction. This might sound obvious, but you'll be surprised how many papers we get submitted without a clear introduction. The introduction is going to set out why you're writing this paper in the first place, introduce a subject matter and provide a justification, and it will also allow you to explicitly define the aims of the paper. This is important because when we look to the conclusion, one of the things that reviewers are explicitly looking for is that the conclusions actually match the introduction. And so if you remember the old sort of academic adage, which is the introduction plus the conclusions, that's what gives you the paper. And the stuff in between, the approach, the results, and so on, that's really backing up what we've got there. So the introduction, you want to be saying, this is why we're doing it. These are the specific aims of the paper. As part of your conclusion, you're going to want to say, did you achieve those aims or not? Okay, and so explicitly back reference to the introduction that we had. Okay, the stuff in between, so the approach and the results or any findings that you may have had, we'll leave this pretty much up to people, but this is what we give as part of the advice to the reviewers. The references are very important. You must have references. You must provide a provenance to what you're doing. This serves a number of purposes. First of all, it helps the reviewers to establish that you do actually, you are aware of the field and you are aware of other work in the field. This establishes you, the author, as having a certain level of expertise in the field, but also it helps us avoid things like plagiarism. So over the last few years, we've had a couple of times when people have written papers with the best will in the world, but it's actually been something that's been published before, whether people have realized it or not. And so it's important that we do have references in there so that we can actually check the provenance of the paper. So, the references are actually very important. Now, when it comes to submitting the full paper, it doesn't need to be an absolute complete set of references at that point, but bear in mind it is one of the criteria that the reviewers will be looking for. And we got some guidance on what these things should look like there. Also, what we've now got is we do have a Word template for the paper. So when you submit the template, it must be in Word. So I must be able to edit it. The main reason for that is I need to be able to redact some of the information, particularly the affiliation, the name and the affiliation information. So the author details, name, affiliation and email. We do try to anonymize the papers, but there's only so much we can do towards that. So obviously we'll take your name out in your biography and any affiliation. But if your paper is, for example, focused on a specific application, so last year we had a couple of papers on HS2, it's difficult to redact all the information relating to HS2 from the paper. So we do a basic level of redaction of information. We do a basic level of anonymizing, and that is we remove all reference to the author's names and their organizations and the project. Now, we do have part of the onus is on the reviewers that if they do recognize the author, because sometimes that has happened, they will contact me and say, for example, I recognize this author, I don't think I should be reviewing this paper, which is great because in which case I can allocate another reviewer. Okay, in some situations, people have emailed me and said, I've figured out who this person is, but I still think I can give an impartial review. And again, I make a judgment call there on whether that should go ahead or not. So there is a certain level of anonymization, if that's even a word, that goes on at this point. So that's basically the guidance we have for writing the papers. So what I'm going to talk about now is the review process itself and the reviewer guidelines. This is the information that's given to reviewers. All this is freely available from INCOSE UK, but if you can appreciate what the criteria is that we ask the reviewers to use, it will give you an insight into how to write your paper and how to pitch it. Okay, so a few key points here. So this is what we send to the reviewers, and as I said, this is in the public domain. Everybody's got access to this. Each submission must be 6 pages and only 6 pages. I'll talk about what happens if you go over that in a moment. Bear in mind, we're not looking for massive academic style papers. Bear in mind that primarily the ASEC is aimed at industry, it's aimed at practitioners. However, we are expecting a certain level of rigor from these papers, okay? But we're not looking for full academic papers with 200 references for each one and a 20-page paper, okay? As we said, all papers will be reviewed by 3 reviewers. Each of those will be selected based on their self-nominated areas of expertise. And also each reviewer will only review a maximum of 3 papers. This is important because it means that there's no single reviewer that's going to be overloaded by papers. I think 3 is a reasonable number, and it allows people to write a nice sort of thorough review of the paper. As I've mentioned, all the papers will be made anonymous as far as possible. As I said, sometimes that's not always possible, and sometimes reviewers happen to know about a particular project anyway. We rely on the integrity of the reviewers. As I said, they're all at a particular level. I have met all of the reviewers as well, so they are all known to me. So that they are all, not just based on their CEng and their CSET, but also, the fact that they got CEng or CSET means they're professionals. They're all professional reviewers, and we've got to rely on their integrity to say if they think that they're not a suitable reviewer for whatever paper. You also have to bear in mind that the reviewers themselves are anonymous, and the reviewers aren't made available to the authors. Even in the very rare occasions when we have people come back and complain about the reviews or say that they want things, you still won't know who the reviewers are. Okay, each review is scored between 0 or 10. Okay, if the average review, and I stress the average because bear in mind there's 3 scores for each one, if the average review comes out between 0 and 3, it will not be published. It's as simple as that. Okay, so when we talk about the acceptance level of the papers, and I said we take the top 11 scorers plus the next 2 for the review papers, we will not accept a paper that averages between 0 or 3. In the very, very rare occasions that it happens that we don't have enough papers, this has only happened, I think, once in my time as technical director. Right at the beginning, we actually invited papers in that we'd seen presented at other conferences. So what this does, it just allows us to maintain a particular, the right level of quality. Between 4 and 7 means that the paper should be considered, but there's going to be feedback to the authors that might, that the authors have to take into account that might mean that they can improve the quality of the paper. An average score between 8 and 10 means that the paper should definitely be accepted and published. Okay. What happens then is the reviewer then writes a mandatory set of comments that are fed back to the authors. So every reviewer will always receive a set of comments. Sorry, every author will always receive a set of comments from each of the 3 reviewers. The way that happens is they're all sent to me. I will then compile them into a short Word document, and then that will be sent back to the authors along with the overall score. Along with the overall decision. Okay. These comments, and we say that they must be objective, and any criticism made must be polite and professional. That's just professionalism from the reviewers. But also bear in mind that there's an optional set of comments that's not fed back to the authors that might be used as an input to the events committee when we're making the final decision. So, for example, if somebody is concerned about plagiarism or something like that, sometimes that will be raised. If someone's concerned that maybe they've seen this work presented in other points in time at different conferences, then that might be fed back. So there's all sorts of things that can be fed back. So bear in mind the set of comments that you receive with the authors are specifically aimed at you as the authors, and it might be that there's further comments that have come back to me as the technical director that are going to help me inform my decision. So these are the criteria that we ask the reviewers to use. So first of all, are the goals of the paper clear and concise? So do you understand exactly what the authors are setting out to do? This is your introduction, essentially. So we explicitly saying to the reviewers, look at the introduction. Do you know what the aims of the paper are? Because if you've got a rambling introduction, or it's ambiguous, or it's not clear, then it's really not possible to say whether the paper's been successful or not. So that's something to make very explicit at the beginning in the introduction. As I mentioned earlier, what are the aims of the paper? State them explicitly, do them as a bullet list if you want to, but make sure that they're very clear. Also, very importantly, this is the next point, is the subject matter relevant to systems engineering and INCOSE/INCOSE UK. So we say INCOSE there as the bigger INCOSE. Is it relevant to systems engineering? Because we've actually had some papers that have come in that have been actually quite good, but all of the reviewers have picked up that they're not actually that relevant to systems engineering. So that's important. It needs to be obviously under the umbrella of systems engineering. We need the authors to establish that they're knowledgeable in the field. They needn't be world leaders or world experts in the field, but they at least need to exhibit that knowledge that they have. Is the approach that has been taken well thought out, logical and scientific? So you can do things according to classic scientific method if you want to, but whatever your approach is, we're looking for something that makes sense, that's logical, that you're not making too many assumptions on, that's as objective as possible. The next point relates to the references that we mentioned earlier. Are the references relevant to the paper, and do they cover the scope of the paper? So again, that will help to establish the previous point about are the authors knowledgeable in the field, but it will also help us avoid any potential issues like plagiarism or so on. The next point now, what are the benefits identified in the paper? Are they clear, identified and qualified or quantified in some way? If you're submitting a paper to the ASEC, there must be some value in it. There must be some benefit in it to a particular stakeholder or group of stakeholders. If you write a paper that says, we did this on this project and there's no discernible benefit, then you will be marked down on it. It is as straightforward as that. So again, make it clear, what is the benefit of the approach that you've done? What did you learn from the approach that you've done? Even if the project's failed, that's still valid. We can learn lessons. We can learn lessons from it. And also, very importantly, when we have these benefits, can we qualify them in some way? Can we quantify them in some way? So can we measure them in some way? Because again, a paper that just says, well, the results were really good and we really liked them, doesn't hold as much weight as something that's actually been scored effectively, or that we can apply numbers to, or that we can qualify according to an established scale or something like that. So that's important. What's the value? What are the benefits that we have? The next point, do the conclusions reflect on the original goals of the paper? We have quite a lot of papers that come in and the conclusions don't do that. And as we said earlier, the introduction plus the conclusions is what essentially gives you the paper. And that's absolutely crucial to everything that we do. The next one, does the paper comply with the submission guidelines? All the papers must use the Word template that we send out to them when they're submitted, and they must come back to me in an editable Word document. Okay, please don't send in PDFs, because we may or may not be able to edit those depending on what we're doing. So do them in Word and use the template that comes in. If you don't use the template, ultimately, it won't be accepted. I mean, and that sounds a little harsh, but bear in mind, these are going into the proceedings. If you start messing around, reducing font sizes so you can squeeze more information in, we lose the whole look and feel on the proceedings. So this is very important from an INCOSE UK point of view, is that you comply with the submission guidelines and that you use the template. Every year we get people that submit papers that are too long. Okay, we set a 6-page maximum for the papers. Sometimes we will allow this to go slightly over, but only with references and the author's biography. Okay, this is very important. Under no circumstances will we allow a paper to go over 7 pages. The core of the paper has to be the 6. Occasionally we will let ones go over, as I said, for the biography and if it's a particularly long set of references. The reviewers are explicitly told that if a paper is too long, that they can mark it down. And if a paper is very, very long, they can just refuse to review it or give it a 0. This is important because we have some people that have submitted papers that have been in excess of 28 pages long. Okay, if we're asking for a 6-page paper and a 28-page paper comes in, I can't assume that my reviewers are going to be happy to review that paper. So in such circumstances, the reviewers are perfectly in their right to either score it a 0 or a 1 or whatever, and just say this shouldn't be accepted on the basis that the paper is massively too long. So, really do bear that in mind when you're doing it. Every year we get people saying 6 pages isn't very much. I appreciate that it isn't very much, but these are the guidelines that we got in place at the moment. Please don't ask to have extra pages, because if we do that for one author, we have to do it for all of them. If you ask for extra pages, the answer will be no. It's as straightforward as that. This is to keep things readable. It's to make things fairer on the reviewers, and also bear in mind that these are all going into the proceedings, and it's to make sure that people don't dominate the proceedings, but also we have to budget every year for exactly how many pages are in the proceedings. And it's not just the printing costs, it's the cost it takes to actually bring all that information together, to format it, to get the covers right, very importantly to get the spine right, because if you go over on your page count, it will throw out the width of the spine, and it will mean extra costs incurred by INCOSE UK. So the length of the paper, we have people bring this up every year. This is why. So it will be 6 pages. Occasionally we'll let people go slightly over, but on no circumstances will it be more than 7. We always say, even when you submit your first draft of the paper, please do it using the template. Okay, because if you don't, we can't get an accurate appreciation of the length of the paper. And so, as I say, this happens every year. People get upset because their paper has received a very low score, and in many cases, it's because the paper has gone over the length. So that's really important that that you have to bear that in mind. So this is the criteria that we give to the reviewers. This is what the reviewers are asked to review the papers based on. Okay. And here's the point at the bottom. If they've got any questions or they don't feel suitably qualified to carry out the review, they will let me know, and then I can allocate another reviewer. Each reviewer then submits a separate Word file for each review with the paper title, the reviewer comments based on the criteria we can see here, feedback for the authors, so that's an explicit section that will be sent back to you as the authors, and then feedback for INCOSE UK. That comes back to me and potentially will be used by the event team in the in the circumstances where we need to question a paper. If we got 2 papers with exactly the same score that are on the borderline, then we'll look at these comments, and that will help to inform the decision. And then of course we've got the deadlines on this. Bearing in mind that all of our reviewers have deadlines, the deadlines are put in place to make sure we can get everything collated, we can get the proceedings done, we can get everything in place before the ASEC. If you ask for an extension on time, sometimes we will grant one if the circumstances are appropriate, but bear in mind that the timeframes that we're operating on, it might seem that, asking you to submit papers on the middle of May, that's a long way from November when the ASEC is, but you've got to bear in mind there's an awful lot of work that goes on with those papers before we get to the ASEC, and that's why we have the deadlines that we do. So that doesn't mean we don't offer extensions to people, but there has to be a good reason, and we have to bear that in mind when we make that decision. So those documents are available. So there's the one that describes the actual review process itself with the anatomy of the paper. We publish that every year in preview anyway, in ePreview anyway. And as I said, that's available as a PDF from INCOSE UK. And the other thing is the reviewer's guideline. So even if you're not a reviewer, that's available to you should you want to see it, so you can get an idea of the criteria that we use when we do the when I ask the reviewers to do the reviews. Okay. So any questions or comments at this point? I mean, hopefully it's given you a bit of an insight into, not just the review process, but why we got things like the paper lengths, and the extensions and so on. So Ian, you review things from us. You've been on the other side of this as well, yes, as has Mark. So, and the deadlines on you as a reviewer are quite tight as well. And if you've got 3 papers to review in just a few weeks, and one of them is 30 pages, that's not a good situation to be in. So hopefully it's given you some sort of insight. So we've got a few minutes left. So any questions or comments or observations that people want to make? If you do have any suggestions for enhancements or improvements to the review process, you're more than welcome to send them to me as technical director. And as I say, we do normally, there's at least a couple of people each year, it's normally the same people, to be honest, that send me suggestions for how to improve the process. I do actually read them, and occasionally we do take some of these comments if they're feasible, and we do feed them back into the review process itself.
Hi, my name is Tulami.
Hi, Tulami.
So the question I had was around the level at which the academic level to pitch the paper. And I'm trying to sort of get it clear in my head. And so what you said is you're not sort of expecting master's, academic type paper.
Mm.
And so I was just sort of trying to understand, like, is there sort of like a more sort of informality which is accepted?
Yes, I mean, it can be. So what you have to bear in mind is if we have 2 people that turn up to the conference, I think, and Richard can correct me if I'm wrong with this, but a ballpark figure, probably only 10 of those will be academics. Okay, so just as a rough percentage. So you have to bear in mind that the main target audience is going to be industry. So for example, when you write your paper, yes, we want you to establish that you're knowledgeable in the field, but don't take 4 pages to do that, to establish how brilliant you are, because what most people in the audience are going to be looking for are, even if it's a piece of research, and don't get me wrong, we encourage research, but what are the benefits of this, and how can we employ these benefits to move systems engineering forward? So we tend to find, obviously we want a particular level of formality in the papers, but it doesn't have to be as sometimes as sort of clinical as academic papers can be, and you've only got you've only got 6 pages to do it in anyway, so you're quite limited as to how much you can get across in there. So we're looking at rigor, and this is why we're explaining what we're looking for in each paper. So we want to know, what are the aims? Very importantly, what are the benefits of doing this? What's the value in applying this research or this case study or the lessons that you've learned or whatever? And finally, did you succeed or not? So that's really what we're looking for. But as I said, you've got to bear in mind the target audience for this is primarily, it's going to be people from industry, and people that attend the ASEC, they're looking for new areas of research to sort of deploy as well. So if you are involved in research, it's actually a very good vehicle to show something off. And also bear in mind, if you have got a full paper or a thesis or something like this behind behind the paper, you can always reference it anyway and point people towards it. Also, when we present at the conference, you can get across a lot more information during the presentation that you typically can in the paper. So the 2 should be seen as complementary, and of course you can point people towards other research or other work that you've carried out during the presentation as well. So has that helped, Tamali, or has that muddied the water?
That's answered my question, John. Thank you for that.
Well, are you based in academia, if you don't mind me asking?
No, I'm not. I'm actually work for a rail infrastructure type company, but we do a bit of like experimental research in collaboration with suppliers. Yeah,
so stuff like that, absolutely bang on. Particularly, industrial research. We get some academic research papers, but like I say, you have to bear in mind it's not an academic conference. But we do have some really interesting areas of research that come in. So yeah, please do consider that, Somali, and submit something if you can. So.
Thank you for that, John.
As I said, the documents that I presented on the screen will be made available as well. So you just have to contact events@incoseuk.org for any queries relating to that. If you send them to events, they'll then get passed on to me if they're relevant. So they'll get passed to the relevant person. If you email me directly, I can't guarantee they won't get caught up in my filter, or that I won't ignore them or anything like that. If they go to events, I can't ignore them because it becomes part of the formal submission process then. So even if you just got a question, events is the best way to do that. And then they'll forward them on to me, and they will pester me and make sure that I answer them. But there we go. Okay, any final questions or comments? Otherwise, we're pretty much on time to finish on time. So. Okay, well, in that case, I'd like to thank everybody for coming. I'm looking forward to your submissions for the ASEC this year, and I look forward to seeing some of you at the ASEC.